Hello, good morning. I'm Samantha Simmonds. Joining me for the whole programme are Janet Daby, the Labour MP for Lewisham East, and Louis French, the Conservative MP for Old Bexley and Sidcup. A warm welcome to you both. Great to have you on the programme. Now let's start with grooming gangs in London. Last July, Politics London reported claims from one campaigner that the issue is potentially more catastrophic here than anywhere else in the country. And this week, charities tell us there is still far more that needs to be done to protect children. Helen Drew has been speaking to one woman who is educating young people about the danger these predators pose.
See what you can do and what part you have to play, because we all have a part to play, right? And it could be that you're on the receiving end, or you might witness someone being on the receiving end. How do you support them? How do you get them to recognise what experience they're having?
Sahrish works as a Violence Against Women and Girls project manager. One of her motivations is her own background.
My job now, for example, and all the work that I do in the Violence Against Women and Girls sector, it stems from my own lived experience, not just my own lived experience, but the vicarious lived experience I've had from those women around me. The barriers I had growing up in my life, and there was many of them. A lot of barriers from the area you grow up in, the environment you're in, your family structure, all those vulnerabilities play a part in when you get exploited. And for me, I think I wanted to make that change. I think there are so many people along the way in this system that could have asked questions, that could have raised awareness, maybe just asked, are you okay?
Now she goes into over 30 primary and secondary schools, colleges and youth groups to raise awareness of violence against women and girls issues, including how to recognise being groomed by a gang for sexual exploitation.
I often find young people don't know they're being exploited. They don't know they're being groomed, and they feel like it's their choice. They feel like they're giving consent to what they're going through, and that is what the perpetrator does. They could love bomb them, they tell them they're safe, they're protected, you know, I'm here for you. They fill gaps that they know, they recognise, and each vulnerability they recognise in that young person they'll exploit. So they're exploiting their vulnerabilities, and that is how they get them to believe that it's their choice they're here.
It's something London charity Drive Forward sees with the work they do. In nearly all London boroughs, they help 16 to 26-year-olds who've been in care to find employment.
Well, more than any other city that we have, London gives the opportunity for invisibility, particularly for young people within the care system. And I think that's possibly one of the reasons why we haven't seen something on the scale that we have seen in Northern England be revealed, but that is very likely in due course. Gangs and grooming gangs and sexual exploitation gangs will be prevalent in London. You know, we see it, we hear it, we know that it happens. It hasn't come to the full attention yet, but unfortunately it is a yet, because it will, and it happens. There is far more that we need to do to protect young people in care and give them pathways. What we do as a charity is a pathway into employment. That we feel is security, it's stability, it's giving them purpose, it's moving them out of that risk category. But that's not happening for everybody, and that's where the efforts need to be put in.
The Home Office says their paramount objective is to root out the horrific crimes of grooming gangs, to punish perpetrators and to protect children from harm.
We're joined now by Sema Gornall, who is Chief Executive of the Vavengers, a London-based charity that works to combat violence against women. Welcome to you, Sema. Good to have you with us on the programme again. We just heard there about this issue of gangs who groom children from exploitation, and the fact that it is a big issue here in London. Can you tell us a little bit more about these gangs, how they operate and who they target?
It's actually more and more common. Often, I would say, a perfect target for these criminals are young people who live on a council estate. You know, their parent can't make ends meet. There's no 3 square meals on the table, and you know they can't buy everything they want. So you know these adult men meet them, and then they offer them, like Sahrish, my colleague, was saying, they're offering gifts and things that they can't receive themselves from their parents. And then after that, what we see is, I talk again in the context of women and girls. What we see particularly with young girls and vulnerable young adult women is that they often get something on the person, to say an explicit image, and then they start exploiting them further into a group rape, anything is a fair game after that point, which is incredibly concerning to us, and it's presented as a relationship. I think the perspective of older generation, when we speak to them in our workshops, is that young people are probably more alert to what healthy relationships look like. You know, there's plenty of data out there. For example, Let Me Know charity has conducted multiple researches in schools. Young people's relationships are way more toxic, they're way more at risk. In my days, you know, we would see grown adult men waiting outside the school for girls to trap them. Right now we have phones. You don't need to wait outside the school.
So a lot of it's online.
Yeah.
And when we talk about gangs targeting these young people, children in some cases, how do they operate?
I genuinely think some of these men do not see themselves as gangs, because they do it to children that they target. They also do it to children in their families. We receive so many women and girls who report sexual exploitation within the family. They're doing it to everybody, and they, like I said, because they don't see themselves as gangs, they see women and girls as something that, and boy children as well, for drug business and other stuff. They see them as like fair game, and they can do anything they like. And I guess maybe they see it as, I'm a man and it's my right. That's the mentality that we're dealing with, because if you'd asked any of these men, none of them would have said, you know, we're operating a gang here.
Yeah, and we've asked the Met about data around this, how many young people are affected. We've had a statement from them saying our data shows most prevalent threat to children and young people in London is criminal exploitation, and they talk about particularly recruitment into county lines gangs. They said we are not complacent to other types of exploitation, such as offending by grooming gangs. We accept this type of crime often goes underreported, and we are working to improve the quality of data we hold. But there does seem to be an issue around the collection of data and just how many people are affected.
Well, I always come to this program actually with data and strong facts. On this one, sadly, I can't give you one, because it's so vast that we see it in almost 95% of the, you know, what seems like presented as relationships when young people and vulnerable women come through to our hubs, because it's presented as a relationship. And unless you're a safeguarding officer, a professional, a good policing officer, you would not be able to put the dots together and put the 2 and 2 together.
So there's a lack of education for the police themselves about recognising when someone is a victim of this. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think the police in London, the Met Police, cannot put the 2 and 2 together. They are unable to identify. That's why we have the data issue, because as charity professionals, we put all of these dots together and we can say this child or young person is clearly being exploited. This is a gang. Of course they won't call themselves gang, but as the police officer, it's your job to do that and take it to the CPS so that we can actually clear how many cases we're dealing with. There's a huge data poverty. I'm quite concerned actually of the way how we have zero data on this in London.
Yeah, Janet, you were Children's Minister up until September. What did you see around this issue, and what do you think about this lack of data?
Well, thank you, Samantha, and thank you, Sammy, so much for everything that you've said and so passionately. I mean, first of all, to say that child exploitation, violence against women and girls, sexual exploitation is horrific in all of its forms, and my thoughts are always with all of the victims and the family and everybody that's been affected, and absolutely victims need to be supported and protected. Obviously in my role as the former Children's Minister, focus was very much around child protection, keeping children safe through the Children and Wellbeing in Schools Bill, looking at making sure that that the corporate parenting responsibilities are there, but also very much around setting up multi-agency child protection within local authorities, because you just need everybody working together really.
So is that happening in London?
So yes, there's Pathfinders, the 10 Pathfinders that took place that is happening, but the reforms are being rolled out. But the other area that I've been working on in that position that the government continues to work on is really the ICSA recommendations that came out of Alexis Jay's review. She did a 7-year inquiry, spoke to 7,000 victims and came out with recommendations in 2022. This government has decided to take on board those recommendations and to act on that. And one of the things in that is around the Child Protection Authority, which is about having a national oversight, advising government policy, being a specialist, being an expert. There's loads that still needs to be done. There's always more that needs to be done, as well as what's come out through Louise Casey as well,
when it comes,
and her inquiry.
And we just heard from Sema there saying that the police don't seem to recognise when this is an issue, and the Met themselves have said we're working to improve the quality of data we hold. if they don't know the numbers, they don't know who the victims are, there's a real failing there, isn't there?
Well, I don't disagree. We need data. The Met should be holding and having data, and that's crucially important. And I've heard Sammy, we spoke even before about that. So there is a lot that needs to be done. There is more that needs to be done. But, you know, the Mayor of London is totally committed to tackling violence against women and girls. And I know there's lots that is taking place around, obviously, you've already mentioned county lines, but you know, in terms of grooming children and young children, it shouldn't happen, it mustn't happen, but we do know it does happen, and that's why we need to, the government is focused on this area.
Louis, this is a long-standing problem, something that also came under the purview of your last government for many years, but a lot of these victims are actually picked up from children's home. They're supposed to be in the care of the local authorities, aren't they? What's going wrong here?
Well, firstly, Samantha, I think it's deeply concerning to firstly hear from charities directly about the scale of the problem they're seeing on the ground, and I thank Sema and the other charities that are working on these issues across London, but to understand the concerns that are happening, not just with the police and the lack of data, but also those local authorities, which do have direct kind of corporate parenting responsibilities. I think there clearly has to be a multi-agency approach to this, whether that's charities, local government and the police working together, but there also has to be political leadership over this issue. And for far too long, victims of these horrific crimes have gone you know, without justice, and that has to stop. But for politicians to make that kind of the important decisions around funding and other issues, we have to know where the data is. And as Baroness Casey review uncovered, I do fear that victims have been falling through the cracks for too long.
Yeah, Janet, originally Keir Starmer said a national inquiry into grooming gangs wasn't necessary. He's flip-flopped over this, said there would be one following Dame Louise Casey's report. 4 months on, Labour haven't even appointed someone to chair this inquiry, have they?
So in terms of the inquiry itself that's happening and needs to happen and should happen, there are also inquiries that have taken place where no work was done on that, and this government is starting to bring forward and starting to work on that.
A lot quicker?
Absolutely, absolutely, things need to happen a lot quicker, and I'm sure victims would say that. But what the government, I'm aware, has been working on is a child sexual exploitation police task force, which means they're re-looking at the victims, and victims have a choice to re-look at their cases. So there is work taking place, and there is government conversations happening, of course, as well.
Okay, Sema, what's your view on the work that the government's doing, and also the fact that this inquiry hasn't even started yet?
Children are falling through the cracks, like, you know, Baroness Casey has said. I think we need it at an absolute speed. It needs to happen immediately. And one of the things that I would actually we suggest as a charity, is that we need to start surveying women and children. Children at education points, train the trainer, train your teachers to survey your children regularly on these things. Teach them what sexual exploitation, grooming looks like, because majority of the young people in school systems, they have no idea. And it's very unfair.
That needs to be part of the national curriculum.
I would also say, actually strongly suggest that this government immediately launches an inquiry on the Metropolitan Police, because that is our problem. We have a data gap because the Met Police is not able to resolve, they're not able to resolve their issues on their own.
Is an inquiry necessary though? Wouldn't that just slow things down? Isn't it just making sure that they actually do that?
I think unless you do that, then you can't actually prove. This is a very evidence-based country we live in, and, you know, because we have no facts here, you know, on the table, I think we do have to do an inquiry into the way the policing system works, into why we haven't dealt with this, because this was happening, like I said, since I was in high school. We just changed the way these forms of violence operate.
Okay, very briefly, do you agree there should be an inquiry?
No, I think what we need is political leadership right now. And that requires the Mayor of London to stop burying his head in the sand and actually launch this inquiry. Andy Burnham has done it in Manchester. He's offered to do it on a voluntary basis. We need that same level of political leadership in London. We need the government to stop dragging its feet. We all know that Labour MPs voted against the national inquiry. I think that was shocking, to be quite frank. I've met some of the survivors of these horrific crimes, and they were appalled that this was happening. So we need the government and the Mayor to get on with it and do their job.
And I'm sure the Mayor would disagree with that, but we do have to leave it there. Thank you. I'm sure he would say he isn't burying his head in the sand, but he isn't here to defend himself.
Absolutely not.
Thank you, Sema. Thank you very much for coming in to discuss this issue.